Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Page One Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us at the Page One Podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, hear how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. And there is a big back catalogue of authors, screenwriters, video game writers, journalists, comedians. So do check out the past episodes if you haven't already, because there's bound to be some that you're interested in.
Absolutely.
And we're adding another great name to the list this week.
We are indeed, Marco. Today we are chatting with Simon Beckett, who is a pretty big author now, but he did a bit of a rocky start, as you allude to in his interviews. Quite a interesting restart of sorts.
Yeah, he sort of broke through with some standalone novels, but then went through that sort of fallow period that some writers can stumble into after their initial breakthrough, which obviously, as we chat in the podcast about, is not something you expect. If you're an aspiring writer, once you get signed by an agent and then signed by a publisher, you think it's an upward trajectory.
The only way is up from here.
Exactly, but
not always.
But the good news is, in Simon's case, it very much has gone back up to that upward trajectory.
So and the success he's seen now with his David Hunter series of books is fantastic. 12 million copies worldwide, #1 bestseller, Sunday Times top 10, etc. He's really done amazing work with it, and to have kind of relaunched that after having dipped a bit is a really interesting story and journey he's got.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff to learn from it.
There definitely is, and then he also tells us about his latest book, The Lost, which focuses on a new character and is potentially the start of a new series as well. So, it's a really interesting episode. So we'll get straight into it. But before we do, we always play an advert for our Page One notebook, which is a sort of structured writer's notebook that we've designed, divided into sections for characters, plot, setting, and so on. Which you can check out on our website. The link's in the bio. But we wanted to let you know that as of today, when this episode goes out, the pre-orders for the new edition of the notebook are finally here.
Finally, we've had to overcome so many hurdles. So boring, you don't even want to know about them.
No,
we're finally got it.
Some minor panics during the printing process, but we are finally there, and the notebooks will be available to be sent out from. I think it's the 12th. So we're opening pre-orders from today until the 12th of December, and you'll get a discount of £5 if you pre-order in that period. And thereafter, they'll be available for everyone. So you can still get them in time for Christmas if you or someone you know is an aspiring writer.
Great Christmas gifts.
So after that pre-advert, we'll play our full advert for the notebook, and then we will be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
Did you always want to be a writer?
It's always been something that I've enjoyed doing. I enjoyed writing stories at school, fairly dark ones even, then it must be said. And then when I did an English degree, and there was a creative writing aspect in that, which I really enjoyed. But it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, really, and I had various other jobs and various other things, and that it sort of became something that I realised I wanted to give it a real go. And it happened. I got the chance to work teaching English as a foreign language in Spain, and so I got the classes were at night. So I used to have all day to fiddle around and pretend I was Ernest Hemingway, and then realise I wasn't. So that's when I really started. It's in my late 20s, really, before I really started.
And you also worked as a journalist as well. Was that at that time as well, or was that later on?
That was a bit later. I played in bands for a while, which was really, I enjoyed it because it was good. But I didn't tell many people I was writing. A few people knew, but because it just seemed not really something you could talk about that easily when you got nothing to show for it. Whereas with bands, you can do demo tapes. Occasionally they have recording singers or whatever. You've got live gigs. So that was quite a serious thing for quite a while, but nothing ever came of the band. And then later on, I was still trying to get what was actually the second novel published, because the first one had just been knocked back. I did rejection slips left, right and centre. And a mate of mine said, well, why don't you try being a journalist? He'd done a journalism course. I couldn't actually afford to do the course at this stage, as I'd been in my early 30s. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And long story about it, I ended up working, doing freelancing stuff for a local lifestyle magazine, and then used that to get my foot in the door with nationals, doing features and things. So that was in my early 30s, and about the same, I'd only just started doing that. And then the first novel was Fine Lines, was picked up off the Slush Pilot publisher called Alison Busby.
Yeah, I was going to ask about how you found your way into the industry. So Fine Lines came out, I think, in 1994. Is that right?
Yeah.
Was it a case of doing the usual, send 3 chapters to lots of agents and just hope one replied?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I was submitting to agents and publishers, multiple submissions, which you weren't really supposed to do, but you could be waiting, don't know how long for replies. As I said, this was the one that was published, actually the second novel. The first one didn't get anywhere. That's still languishing, gathering dust in a drawer somewhere. And so, yeah, it was a case of just, pushing away and pushing and keeping on trying, licking your wounds when the rejection slips come back, because there's always never any shortage of those. And then it was picked up off the Slush Pile. So just completely, I say out of the blue, but it's when it actually happens, it's not quite what you're expecting.
And when you got that when you got the agent and the book was out in 1994, Fine Lines, it was followed quite quickly after by 2 standalones. Was it did you get a 3-book deal at that point? Was it important for you to write books quickly, because you had a bit of a break after that, I think?
Well, a break is a polite way of putting it. I think it's like actors who take breaks as well. I can't remember, to be honest, if it was a 1-book deal or a 2-book deal. But in actual fact, there was another book that followed closely after Fine Lines called Animals, which I don't think ever really, I don't know if it even made it into the shops. There were all sorts of problems around it. So it was a case then of thinking, well, what am I going to do? So I made the effort to try and write more mainstream thrillers, because the first 2 books were very different to each other, sort of like dark psychological thrillerish type things. So then I made a decision to try and write something that would be sort of a bit more on the obviously commercial side of things. So yeah, I had to, but again, one of them I wrote it, and it was then sent off. So I wrote most of it certainly in advance. So I've never been a prolific writer, but I think there tends to be gaps, and then stuff happens.
And I mean, there was a gap. I'm just looking at the bibliography here. There was Fine Lines Animals, Where There's Smoke, Owning Jacob, but then it looks like there was about an 8-year gap until the first in the David Hunter series. Was that just a case of almost going back to the start and trying to find someone that wanted it, or was it a break on your part?
No, it certainly wasn't a break on my part. It was having to go back and start again. I mean, there's been various points in the career where you think that's it, I'm done, I've finished. And after Owning Jacob, didn't do very well. I was really pleased with the book. Where There's Smoke was actually adapted for TV, you think, well, I thought this was going to be the big break thing, and it went out on a Saturday and Sunday evening, quite a big event thing at the time. And on the Monday morning, I got a letter from the publishers saying it had been remaindered. So it was, I knew then that I was going to have to, it wasn't going to go into plan. So for 8 years, basically, I was doing freelance journalism, and that was, I was still writing, but it was just trying to get, somebody interested and trying to get a publisher to actually take the jump with it.
I mean, was that? I mean, I was going to say, is that disheartening? Obviously, it probably was at that time. But I mean, how, I think a lot of people that want to be an author would think, oh, I've got an agent, that's the first hurdle. Second, oh, I'm published. And then you've got a 2 or 3 books published, but then almost to have that sort of step back would be quite a big blow. Did you, how did you keep yourself going on the writing front at that point?
I think you've got to be persistent with it. I think you're going to get knockbacks, and there's times when you think that's it. I've made it, but I don't think you ever have, because there's always got to be the next book, and the next book, if that's not good enough, or if it doesn't do, if it doesn't perform well enough, then you could be struggling. So I've never ever felt I could sort of sit back on my laurels. Perhaps because of all what happened early in the career, you always feel that, it could be snatched away from you at any time, really, I suppose. But yeah, it was hugely disheartening. But fortunately about that, I made pushed onto the journalism, and I managed to get, interesting work. And I enjoyed doing that as well, because it's a very different discipline, much faster turnaround. And obviously, it paid the bills for a number of years when I was, in the novel wilderness, if you like.
Does that side of things as well? As you say, they are very different disciplines, but obviously both involve writing. I mean, does the discipline of having to do things in a fast turnaround, or any other aspects of journalism help you with the fiction writing as well?
It does, yeah. I think it made me realise how important it is to get words down. It didn't actually make me it didn't make me a faster novelist, because it still takes me a long time to actually get a novel in a stage where I think I'm, where I'm happy with it. So unfortunately, the speed side of things didn't translate from the journalism to, the books. Where it did come in invaluable is in terms of research, because with the journalism, you've got to find the right people to talk to, find out the information, then present it in accessible form. And with some of my later novels that that came about in the 2000s or so, the David Hunter series, that became. There was a direct link as well, but being able to sort of not be afraid to pick up the phone and send people emails, just bother complete strangers and say, look, I'm writing a book, would you mind helping me? Mm-hmm. And then, trying to assemble that information into some sort of interesting story.
Are people receptive to that always, or do you ever get someone saying, absolutely not, I'm not going to waste my time?
I've never had anybody being rude. I've had a very odd one or two people who haven't responded, and fair enough, to be honest, it's fine. Majority of people seem, it's been great. They seem to quite enjoy doing it. You've got to be careful, because I wouldn't want to, because, if you talk, particularly you talk to police officers, forensic experts, their day job is pretty serious. It's more important than mine, so you don't want to be wasting their time. But no, that's always been, very pleasantly surprised, and something I've always been, grateful for, the fact that people do take the time out to help out with these things.
And when you said early on that your first novel, Fine Lines, was followed by Animals, and that was quite a different beast of a book. And my impression, looking at your history of writing, is that you kind of, the first 4 books or so was almost you trying to find your voice or find your place, and then it was because the David Hunter books came out, and they were obviously a series, and they were really, really well received, nominated for the Gold Dagger Award in 2006. Was it a case of trying to find your voice, or not? Were you reluctant to be pigeonholed into a certain area or crime genre type thing at the start?
It wasn't that I was reluctant to be pigeonholed, so much as that I don't think I've ever really fitted until the David Hunter series, which was like, okay, this is what I'm doing now, and I could, that it gave me a framework. I've never really thought of myself as a particular type of novelist. My first novel, Fine Lines, I never thought of it as a crime novel. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd read, stuff like Ian Banks' The Wasp Factory, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And and I just wanted to write a dark, compelling story. And it was only when the editor said, well, you've got murder, you've got betrayal, you've got duplicity, what else would you call it if not crime? And that you think, yeah, okay. So it's not a case of not wanting to be bracketed by things, it's just, I think, and then Animals is different again. But again, if you've got a bracketed or something, it's got to be crime. But and then the next 2 books, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to do something that was a bit more commercial, that would have been easier to pigeonhole, but even one of those didn't sit ever so comfortably in it, I suppose. So yeah, it's not something about me being awkward. I think it's just that the writing's tended to, if I've got an idea for a story, it might not necessarily have followed on, be a particular easy one to stick in any category.
Yeah. But the David Hunter obviously was the breakthrough, I suppose. And it obviously nominated for awards, and then has gone on to become a series. How do you find? Did you always intend to have a character that you could build on and develop like that, or was it just something that happened because of the success of The Chemistry of Death?
Yeah, it was very much because of the success. As you said earlier, it's been 8 years since it's been published. So at that stage, I just wanted to write something that somebody might want to publish. It didn't go any further than that. There was no point planning a series or a sequel even, and I didn't know if anybody would go for it in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until suddenly there was an agency that had offers in for this, and and of course you've got somebody said, one of the editors, of course you've got plans for a sequel and a series, and I said, oh yeah, of course. And then you realise that you've suddenly got to start. So I tend not to, it would be nice to say that I've got this master plan, this strategy and all the rest of it, but I tend to learn from one thing to another and hope it works out really.
And when you're writing a series like this, for people out there who are also trying to write a series with a character that you carry on from book to book, how do you keep it fresh? How do you, is it a case of you start to sit down to think about the next book and you think, right, I need to top that in some way, or I need to take it in a new direction? Is it, or is it a case of you got to keep giving them what people want to read and keep hitting those same beats?
No, again, I don't try and hit the same beats particularly. You've got to be aware of, if you're not giving people what they wanted to read, then they're not going to read it, which I don't as a reader either. I think it was more the case with The Chemistry of Death, which was the first one. That, as I said, that was written as pretty much as a standalone. Yeah. So then it was after that where the David Hunter's situation, without giving away any spoilers, had changed by the end of that. I had to start thinking about the direction of the series. And I think one of the saving graces for me, I mean, it made life difficult as well, was that I decided that I was going to take him completely away from the setting of the first novel, because he's a forensic anthropologist, he's a freelance, so he travels around as forensic anthropologists do. They go where the police consultants go where they're, across the country, abroad sometimes, wherever they're called on to go. So it turned out that every novel was going to be set in a completely different location with a different cast of characters. So in a way, each novel I approached it, there's a through line running through them, but I approached each one pretty much as a standalone. Because it's almost like that, there's a TV series whenever the kid man in a suitcase, and each week he'd go to a different, the main character would turn up somewhere else, and have to meet everybody anew. So that was the same situation I was in with the David Hunter series. So in a way, it was enforced that it would have to be, the formula pattern would have to be broken up for each book, because it was starting from scratch to a large extent. I mean, that said, obviously, you've got to have the same sort of familiar things that can be forensics and shots and things like that. But so that allowed me to write completely different settings, atmospheres, and different casts for each one, which I think gave each one a different flavour.
But does it give a? I mean, that's quite a good way of you vary it up for yourself almost in the writing of it, but having a familiar character or characters that can recur in these things, does that help with the writing, that you're not starting completely afresh on a series like that? Is that something that assists?
I think it probably depends on the books and the writers. I think there's no hard and fast rule. There's probably for and against. It would have been, there were times when it would have been easier for me to have used the same characters, from book. So you've got an ensemble that you can, go back to. I did that to some extent in the couple of the later ones, but I wouldn't want then to get into the same thing as you were saying. You do need to keep it fresh. Mm-hmm. And I think if the longer a series goes on for, I think the harder that becomes, no matter what you're doing, no matter how you're approaching it. So I think that is, it's either way. I think there's going to be for and against.
Well, your latest book is The Lost, which is a change. This is a fresh start in many ways because it's not one of the David Hunter novels. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll have a chat about that.
Yeah, sure. It's the main character is Jonah Colley, who's a Metropolitan Police firearms officer. And he is contacted out of the blue one night by somebody he's not seen in years, who asks for his help. Sounds desperate and wants to meet at late, midnight in an abandoned warehouse called Sorter Key. And Jonah, despite obvious misgivings, decides that he needs to go along, find out what's happening, and because somebody's asked for his help. And he gets there, and I don't want to give too much away, but he finds a fairly horrendous scene awaiting for him. Let's put it that way. He's attacked, and as a result of that, he starts reevaluating what's happened in his own life. I should mention that because as part of his history, 10 years previously, his young son disappeared. And Jonah's always blamed himself for that. He's always been guilty about it. And as the story progresses, he begins to suspect that what's happened in the warehouse in the present might somehow be connected to what happened 10 years ago with his son. And causes him to question everything that's gone off and who we can trust and what really did happen. And
what made you want to explore this new character as opposed to another David Hunter novel?
I think I'm always looking at story ideas. It goes back to that idea, earlier on about if you get an idea for a book, you want to write it, whether it necessarily can be neatly pigeonholed or not. I still enjoy writing the David Hunter novels, but Hunter's a very definite type of character. He's a forensic scientist. So there's certain things, certain situations he's not, you can't really comfortably put him in. And I've often thought, sometimes it would be easier if you could just deck somebody or kick a door down or get, be more investigative or all the rest of it, but it's not really in the character's nature, and it would seem wrong if I did that. So when I got the idea for The Lost, which struck me as being a different, slightly different sort of thriller, then it wouldn't have fitted as a David Hunter novel. So I thought, well, okay, let's try something different.
And it is being pitched as the sort of first in a series of books with Jonah Colley. I mean, does that mean that you already have ideas where that character could go?
I do, yes. But I know even when I write a book, I've always got an idea where the book's going to go, and I don't think one of them's ever gone into plan. So although I've got ideas for where the series is going to go, I'm aware that there's going to be movement there. So which is okay. And I used to want to try and nail everything down before I started writing, to give myself that security blanket of thinking, yeah, I know what I'm going to be doing with this, but it never worked out. So I think. Sorry, go on.
No, just think that's exactly what I wanted to ask about, was the kind of planning, pantsing. How much in advance do you put down on paper? We've chatted to folk before in the past who've said that the more you plan in advance, the more bored you get writing almost. You can lose that spark a little bit. So do you like to keep it just enough plot points to keep you going, but you like to find your own way there?
It's not like I was saying earlier. I don't really have any sort of plan with it. I would love to sit down and think I've got a real, a plan. I do plan as much as I can. And just once, I'd like to actually sit down and write a book and it follow the plan. Never, ever do, because I think one of the things, mine tend to be quite character-led, because even though the thrillers and there's a lot of twisted plots going on, what happens in the plot has to come from the characters. It's the way the characters behave and everything. So what I tend to find is that when I'm writing it, the characters as they flesh out in my own mind, you realise that the plot and the characters, the original plot idea, if you like, don't necessarily fit. So it just changes as the story and characters develop. And I do tend to have certain, almost I think of them as sort of stepping stones, sort of scenes in my mind from later on, including an idea of what I'm going to be doing at the end. And then it's a case of writing towards them, knowing that they probably will change to a large extent anyway, and everything around them will probably change. But so yeah, it tends to be a bit of a haphazard approach, but it seems to be what I always end up doing.
And does that approach lead to sort of revising as you go, or do you like to try and just push through to the end, like you were saying, get the words down and then sort of revisit it once you've got a draft there?
I used to try and get through to the end, but I also used to try and write 1,000 words a day religiously, and that didn't work out for me either. So I think what I tend to do now is I push on as much as I can, but sometimes you realise that if something's changed in one of the early chapters, that is then going to have a knock-on effect in later ones. Sometimes you can just make a note and think, okay, I've got to go back and retrofit that later on. But if it's going to be something that drastically affects the rest of the things, because then it's like that ripple effect, the butterfly effect. If like one thing is going to change another and another and another. So sometimes you think, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to stop here, go back, redo it all, and then see where I end up after that.
And do you show it to anyone as you write? Is it important to you to get that space a little bit as you go, as you do edits and drafts, etc., or did you kind of work just by yourself and then hand it over to your agent or your editor?
That's generally what I have done. I don't show it to anybody. I do discuss it with my wife, and we sort of, she tells me if something's a good idea or not. Send out ideas on her, and she pitches in as well. But I've not actually got around to actually showing anybody material as yet. But I wouldn't be necessarily averse to doing that, because I know I am conscious it does take me longer than I'd like to actually write a book, which isn't ideal.
And well, I mean, I was going to ask that, how long, or does it vary book by book? But I mean, how long does it take you from, starting to write a book to being happy with the draft that you can hand on to someone else?
Probably, a good 18 months, and in some cases longer. One of the hunters, I was doing that for ages, and then had to take a break from it and wrote a standalone. still bruises, and then went back to it. So all told, that took a number of years really.
Mm.
So unfortunately, I'm not a one book a year writer. I wish I was, and take the hat off to people who can do it. But mine never seemed to be ready by then.
And does that? I mean, presumably you're in a position now, though, that because I think, especially in the world of crime writing, if you're a new author, you can be, you can get maybe a 2 or 3 book deal at the start, and you then suddenly are under that time pressure. But at your stage of your career, presumably, it's an easier sell to editors or publishers to say, this might take a bit longer to get this to you.
I think the thing is, I've got to be upfront with it. I think anybody who has got to accept it's not. I'm not doing it deliberately. I'm not sort of swanning off on holiday or something like that all the time. It's just, it does, for whatever reason, better or worse, it does take me longer to get a book into shape. I mean, yes, when I was younger, I would, as you were just saying, I've got to, I had to perform much more to deadlines. But I think even then, it was really creaking for me to actually do it. And there comes a point where you think, I've got, how much pressure I'm going to put myself under for this if it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Some people, it's like, some people are sprinters, some people are marathon runners, and I think I tend to be more of a marathon pace.
And it was I'm sure it's a question you've been asked a lot, but writer's block is something which a lot of writers out there struggle with. It's something which can be the form of, you can't get the sentence to work at all, and you're frozen with it, or it can be a case of I can't even get the idea, I don't know where to go next with it. Has it ever happened to you? Do you ever get stuck on that point, whether it's like a page or a whole book, and if so, what do you do to get past it?
Well, I'd say all the time. I mean, that sounds glib, but in actual fact, it's not. I think, again, that's one reason why it takes me so long. The ideas don't come that readily to me, to be honest. You've got to wrestle into shape and wrestle, to fit the, confines of the story and the characters and all the rest of it. So quite often I come to a point, and I mean, I don't think there's any such thing as one type of writer's block. Often it's a case of I get to a thing, I think, I don't know what's going to happen next. And sometimes it's not like you can't think of anything that could happen next. It's about which one of these various options, each one of which could take you in a different direction.
Yeah.
And I think some of it comes down to confidence as well. I think if you're confident when you're writing, then you're less likely to come across that. If your confidence gets knocked for whatever reason, then I think sometimes it doesn't take much just to sort of chip away, and then you lose that assurance in what you're writing. And as to how to get around it, I think you've just got to, again, wish you knew really. I think the only way to do it is just keep pushing at it, and sometimes you've got to force it. Sometimes you've got to think, okay, I've got to put that on one side and either go for a walk or take a longer break sometimes, and then come back to it later. But I think you've just got to, one way or another, you've just got to keep on working at it and try different things until it starts moving again.
Yeah, I mean, past guests that we've had on, in fact, most of them will say that they'll get to that point in writing a novel, maybe 30,000, 40,000 words in, and suddenly start to question everything that they've written, and I suppose that's where experience of having done it before maybe helps a little bit in saying that, okay, I've felt like this before, but I know that I can reach that finish line to extend the racing metaphor. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's knowing that I've been there in pretty much every book I've written at some point or another. And it's interesting because you say about 25,000-30,000 words. That is pretty much the level for me. Yeah. If you generally get as far as 50, you're starting to pick up pace with it.
Yeah.
But any number of times I've got, on different books, I've got 25,000-30,000 words in and binned it. You just think this isn't happening, and started from scratch. So but knowing that I've been here before, what I don't tend to get as much now is that sort of sense of panic of waking up thinking I've no idea what I'm going to write, what I'm going to do, I've got a deadline, you've got all the rest of it, and that doesn't help. And I think that's something that you're better off if you can sort of calm things down a little and just get a bit of perspective about it. Which is
it's so psychological, isn't it?
Sorry.
it's so kind of psychological, isn't it? I mean, a lot of all this stuff is you're as a writer, you're kind of by yourself in your room writing. You got this stuff in your head, and and trying to see the path forward. You get stressed over it. You get panicked stuff. It's all just happening in your head, and it's amazing sometimes how, stepping back from the keyboard or suddenly the solution pops in your head at the most random time, and trying to keep that, trying to not, as you say, try not to get yourself so worked up that you think I'll never solve this problem, and just realize that it will happen. It'll happen. Every book, you always get to that point. It's a normal part of the process. You work through it, and keeping that kind of even keel is really important, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's it, is that keeping that even keel and not getting too panicked by things. Yeah. Because you can't know when the ideas are going to come. I mean, it'd be nice if you sat there and they always came when you're at your desk, but it might be in the middle of the night. It might be when you went off for a walk somewhere. It might be when you're doing something completely different. And suddenly, something pops into your head, and it's just like that little chink, and you think that's the way forward, and then it opens it up. Yeah. And it's just sort of trying to, stay calm until you get to that point.
Yeah, definitely. And would you ever want to write a screenplay or anything like that? Is that something you'd be interested in?
Not anymore. I mean, I had a crack at doing it years ago now. And I quite like the idea because it was a different sort of writing would be involved. Now, no, I wouldn't, because I think it would be too different, and I think I've got ideas for books. I'd rather write the novels and let somebody else handle that side of things open.
Well, I mean, The Lost is out on the 25th. What's next after that? What's in the pipeline? Have you got an idea for what you want to do? Are you working on something already? Have you got an idea for what you want to do next?
Yeah, I've got an idea. If you don't mind, whether it's superstition or whatever, I'll just leave myself wiggle room in case plans change. I don't like to say too much about at this stage what it's going to be, but no, I do have ideas for the next book, and I'm sort of moving things forward as far as that goes. But let's see what happens with that.
Excellent. Nice. And are you able to have a proper launch for The Lost now that we are sort of open up again as a society?
I don't know. I mean, I don't normally do launch things so much anyway, really. So it's I think provided the book's been launched properly, I don't need wine in a
I mean, how was lockdown for you as a writer? Because some people might think being a writer, being forced to sit inside and write all day without any ability to go outside and go to the pub, etc., would be quite a good thing, because it means you can just sit and write and bang out a book in 3 months. Was it quite a struggle? Was it harder than usual, even though for a writer, I guess there's not that much of a difference?
In terms of day-to-day, it wasn't too much difference. I mean, when it came, I was pushing on with The Lost and wanting to try meet deadlines and missing them and all the rest of it. So as far as that went, it was business as usual. It was. I think compared to an awful lot of people, I think I was fortunate, but I don't think it for me. I didn't find it a relaxing atmosphere, shall we say, to be writing dark stories.
What's your view on writing about the pandemic in future books? Is it something which you would reference as something that happened, or would you kind of just pretend it didn't happen and just write about a nondescript year in the life of people?
I don't know, to be honest. It's something that I've thought about that, and I think it would depend on the story, because I think the danger is the situation is still changing. It's still in a state of flux. So unless you're going to set something historically or years in the future where it could still, you've got some manoeuvring room, right? Basically, you don't really know what the situation's going to be too much in 6 or 8 months' time or a year. Hopefully, a lot better. But so I think it will depend really on when I was setting the story and what sort of story it was going to be. But again, that's down to individual writers. I think everybody's got their own.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because especially at the pace that publishing works as well. Even if you wrote a story that could work at the time that you've written it, by the time the book actually comes out, with something like the pandemic or another event that is very, very topical,
everyone could be dead.
Yeah, it could have. Well,
there's no audience.
Things could have moved on. I wasn't going to go quite there. What was the last book that you read?
The last book I read, it was actually John Birmingham. It was a Zero Day Code, I think it was. So he's a speculative writer, I suppose, and it's it's an apocryphal one, but a different sort of a apocalypse, really. But he's a writer. I always enjoy his stuff, and that was.
Oh, that sounds good.
I've not read that stuff. Yeah, that does sound good. What about the last film that you watched?
That would have been not in the cinema, but I would have watched Clear and Present Danger last night.
Oh, nice. Classic.
An oldie, yes.
Yeah. I haven't seen that film for years, I don't think.
Yeah, it held up. It holds up, yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. And what's the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Oh, Succession, I think, at the moment.
Oh, nice.
Fantastic. So I've I've one series, I'm an episode behind at the moment, but that's a joy.
Yeah, I watched the first 2 seasons and a kind of box set, each episode over a weekend, and then this is the first season I'm watching week by week, and it's part of me is like, I hate waiting week by week, but then I'm worried about spoilers, and so it's that kind of, do I just watch it? I feel like I'd enjoy it more watching it in a block, but then if I've read something that ruined it for me, I'd hate it. So it's that impossible first world problem, really. That it's quite a nice problem to have, I suppose. And that's that's the big stuff. And the very, very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or. And I always say there's no right answers apart from one. The first one will go for Lee Child or Kathy Reichs.
Lee Child.
Just because it's easy to say.
TV or cinema?
Probably at the moment TV.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird.
A fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Generally takeaway, I suppose. But a fancy restaurant doesn't go amiss. But
and the last one, real book or ebook?
Both, actually. Depends on the book.
Oh, okay. That's. I'm going to take that as a correct answer. That's fine. I'll accept that. That's fine. Okay.
Well, thanks very much to Simon for coming on to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was really interesting hearing about, obviously, what we talked about at the start, the sort of gap in the career, but also what he was talking about planning there, which is what we hear from a lot of our authors, which is, despite the best laid plans, it's often very difficult to stick to that when you actually get into the writing of it, which I think anyone that has tried to write a long form story will often find.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to keep that on rails the whole way, without feeling that you're forcing it. Once the characters take on their life of their own, you're forcing them down a path sometimes, and that's not the best way to do it. Me, when I write, I like to overcomplicate things, which means I do have to have quite a lot written down beforehand. But at the same time, while that planning is invaluable, there comes a time when I feel I now have to just start writing it, and then I'll adapt it as I go. So yeah, and I think having those, like yourself, you want that plan, you want those beats to hit, maybe the ending in sight, but then enough freedom to kind of move those goalposts a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that's a sporting metaphor.
Oh, it was. We've had quite a few of those this season, Tarek.
So you said football. I know I'm doing quite well. I'm watching Ted Lasso. It's quite helped things.
Which you don't think much of the second
I think I'm actually
season.
worse at than him. Oh, second season was dreadful. Don't know what. I mean, I could do a whole podcast about how disappointed I am in season 2 of Ted Lasso. But
Coming soon.
Yeah, really.
We'll save that one. We'll save that one for another time. But thanks very much to Simon for coming on. If you like the sound of The Lost, then you can go and pick that up now. It's just out at the end of November, and obviously get it in time for Christmas. And Absolutely. Next week we've got another great guest.
Yeah, next week we're chatting with John Ingold, who is a British author of interactive fiction and a co-founder of Inkle, where they made a number of video games, interactive video games. 80 Days was their big one back in the day, which was a kind of round the world in 80 days type of interactive story. And the most recent one is Overboard, which is a kind of reverse murder
you're trying to get away with the murder,
really cool.
Essentially. Which they designed
kind of
during lockdown, essentially. They were bored. They moved off the game they were doing and quickly made this, which has been a big hit. But
yeah, it's a really smart idea.
And he's just, one of their other big games was Heaven's Vault, which was all about the discovery of a language and try to follow that journey, which was an ingenious game, but he's now turned it into a 2-volume story, a 2-book story, which is available to buy. So it's a really interesting chat. It's a bit unusual because chatting with someone that writes interactive fiction, but as we hear, it's actually not all that different from writing a normal story in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, all the planning, the writing, they're still working on characters, motives, and also we touch base on a lot of things like the old fighting fantasy books, the choose your own adventure type stuff. It's very much that kind of ballpark.
So it's
another sporting metaphor.
It was. I keep missing these.
A baseball one. That
I'm so used to them now.
I'm on top of my game.
Again, I see what you did there. No, but it's a really interesting, also really fun chat. John was really good fun to speak to. So hope you can tune in for that one. If you did enjoy today's episode, please do take the time to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use, and leave us a review as well if you can. That would be amazing.
And of course, if anybody wants to get in touch, they could always send us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @right_gear, or an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.